So I'm going to direct your attention to May 25th of last year.
Okay.
Were you on duty as a paramedic with Hennepin EMS that date?
Yes, miss.
And did you respond to a call that evening?
Yes, miss.
Just a little bit back. That way, not quite. A little bit. There you go.
Sorry, sir.
Not a problem. We have to adjust for everybody, so.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, Your Honor. And if you can't hear me, please let me know. And if I can't hear you, I'll let you know.
Thank you, miss.
So getting back to May 25th, what was the initial code or the initial type of call that you understood you were responding to?
We were called Code 2, which means non-emergent, to a mouth injury.
And then at some point en route to that scene, was that call upgraded?
Yes.
And what was the information you had at that time in terms of the upgrade?
At that time, it was Code 3.
And what is Code 3?
Lights and sirens, get there with due regard and as quickly as possible.
And at that point in time, was that all the information you had in terms of first being Code 2 and then Code 3? Not any, did you have any additional information about why it was elevated to a Code 3?
At that time, I had no additional information other than Code 3.
So where did you ultimately respond to that Code 3 call? Was that in the area of 38th in Chicago?
That's correct.
And what did you observe? What did you see when you arrived on scene?
What did I observe when I arrived on scene? There was a police squad, an individual laying down, 3 officers on the individual. There was multiple people. There was multiple cell phones out. There was elevated tones used. It didn't feel like a welcoming environment.
So when you arrived and you said that you saw 3 officers on top of an individual, that individual that they were on top of, was he later identified?
Yes.
And was that individual identified to be George Floyd?
Yes.
So when you come up and you see the scene, 3 officers on top of George Floyd, and you said other individuals with cell phones out, what did you do when you arrived?
What did I do when I arrived on scene? Assessed all corners around us, just gauge what was going on. I walked up to the individual, noticed he wasn't moving. I didn't see any chest rise or fall on this individual. He was in handcuffs at the time. I went up and, sorry.
And when you approached, you said he was in handcuffs. As you approached him to inspect further, were the officers still on top of him?
The officers were still on him when I approached.
And what did you do when you approached?
I was assessing the scene and running through what care may be needed.
And did you take some initial steps, like checking for a pulse?
I checked for a pulse.
And did you also check the individual, Mr. Floyd's, pupils?
I did.
And what did you determine at that point?
They were large, dilated.
So you determined that his pupils were large and dilated. What about a pulse?
I did not palpate a pulse.
And when you say palpate, is that you didn't feel or detect a pulse?
I did not detect a pulse.
And what did his condition appear to be to you overall?
In lay terms, I thought he was dead.
So what did you do next?
I kind of looked for my partner and told him I think he's dead and I want to move this out of here.
Okay.
And I will begin care in the back
Did you say you would begin care in the back?
of my rig.
And is the rig where your equipment is to deal with something like a cardiac arrest?
Yes, miss.
I'm going to show you something that has not been admitted but has been marked as Exhibit 56, so we'll just show it on your screen at the moment. Do you see that on your screen?
Kind of a glare, but yeah.
Can you see it now if you reposition a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are we here, Judge?
You want to tilt it a little bit?
This?
It says do not touch this way.
Yeah. I get the gist of it, yeah. That's
Can
me
you-
touching this carotid artery, there's no pulse.
All right. So you recognize this image is yourself checking for Mr. Floyd's pulse. Is that a fair and accurate picture of that?
Yes, miss.
Your Honor, I would offer Exhibit 56,
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
56 is received.
and I'd ask to publish it. All right. And I think you just described this as you checking for a carotid pulse. Is that right?
That's correct.
What's a carotid pulse? What does that mean?
The artery in the neck, it's one we check for that. It's closest to the heart. There should be one there if you're up and breathing.
Okay. And at the time you're checking
Or
for this,
alive. Pardon me?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Or I meant alive, I said breathing. Anyways, go ahead.
So why don't I just circle back to that?
Okay.
You're checking for a carotid pulse. What was your response to that? It would be one that you would find if you were, please finish your thought.
Repeat that, please.
I apologize.
No, it's on me.
Why do you check the carotid pulse, and what would you expect?
In a living person, there should be a pulse there. I did not feel one. I suspected this patient to be dead,
Okay.
in lay terms.
And at the moment that you're checking for this carotid pulse, are the officers still positioned on top of Mr. Floyd?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to take down Exhibit 56, and I'm going to put on the screen an exhibit that has already been admitted as Exhibit 248. If we could put that up, please. And then, does this show a different angle of your initial, well, what does this show here? Do you see yourself in this picture?
Yes.
Okay, and what are you doing?
I am at the top of the screen there in that brown uniform.
And you can use the stylus to be a little stylus or
Am I
your
supposed to
fingers
touch?
to, it's a touch screen, so you can just
So
point out where you were.
That's me.
Okay, and what are you doing in this picture?
I think I'm grabbing my flashlight and I'm assessing what's going on here.
Okay, and then in terms of using your flashlight, is that something you use to assist with checking pupils?
Yes, miss.
Okay. So while you were at the head of Mr. Floyd, did you check both his pulse and his pupils?
Yes, miss.
All right. And we can take that down. So at that point, what happened next after you did those things?
After I checked pulse and pupils,
Yes.
I looked for my partner and provided him that I believed the individual to be deceased. I wanted to get off scene, and I would start care in the back.
And did you take steps to make that happen?
Yeah, we grabbed our stretcher, our poles and canvas, and we were starting to prep to move the patient.
And did you have any interaction with the officers in terms of moving the patient?
Once we got the poles and canvas on the ground, the officers were very helpful in moving the patient onto the canvas.
So did the officers assist you in moving
Yes.
the patient? Did you have to provide some direction to them in terms of moving the patient?
Yes, at one point I had to tell one of them to get out of the way. They're in my way.
Okay. And then why was that? What were you trying to accomplish?
I wanted to get my patient to my rig as quickly as possible so I could begin my resuscitation efforts. He was standing in between the stretcher and where I needed to be. He needed to be eliminated from the situation.
And were you you said as quickly as possible. Why were you trying to get things done as quickly as possible?
For my patient care.
And is timing something important when it comes to someone who's in cardiac arrest?
Yes.
And why is that?
His heart isn't beating, and it should be, and the longer it isn't beating, the greater the likelihood this individual will not be resuscitated.
Okay. So, did you ultimately load the patient onto the ambulance?
Yes.
And did you end up, did one of the officers on scene come with you?
We had one officer from Minneapolis, yes.
And why was that?
I needed somebody to start chest compressions.
And when you arrived on scene, had there been any, did you observe anyone rendering any medical care or chest compressions when you arrived?
When I arrived on scene, there was no medical services being provided to the patient.
Okay. So when you got on the ambulance, did you do some further assessment of Mr. Floyd's condition?
Yes.
And was it at that point that, well, what did you do next?
We're in the back of the rig.
Yes.
I had them shut the doors. I took the Minneapolis police officer with me. I started to declothe the individual to better assess.
And just to stop you right there, why do you have to do something like that?
To better assess what's going on, to get room to just do my job and provide patient care.
And when you declothe an individual, does that provide further access in terms of any IV or other options for you?
Yes.
So what did you observe at that point as you were doing your initial assessment of Mr. Floyd?
He had some superficial injuries to his face and shoulder, it appeared. I reconfirmed that he was pulseless and wasn't breathing. I had to take the handcuffs off. I had the clothes getting removed so I could prepare to take care of this individual.
And did you personally take off the handcuffs?
Yes, I took off the handcuffs.
How are you able to do that as a paramedic?
I have a pair of handcuff keys.
So in the line of your work, you're able to use those keys to take handcuffs off an individual?
Yes.
And is that the key that you used?
Yes.
And did you provide some additional direction to the law enforcement officer who was with you?
Yes.
And what was the nature of that?
I inquired to the events prior to my arrival, and I also directed him to do chest compressions.